The name Trump is etched into the skyline of New York City, a symbol of ambition cast in glass and steel. But the foundation of that empire? Well, it wasn't laid in Manhattan. It was built, brick by brick, in the working-class neighborhoods of the outer boroughs. This is the story of how that foundation was built, and its complex, often controversial role in shaping the city we all know today.
So picture this, it's the 1970s and New York City is on the brink of bankruptcy. A lot of people saw a city in decay, but a young Donald Trump saw golden opportunity. And this quote, it really tells you everything about his mindset. His vision was fixed on the biggest stage of them all, Manhattan. But to really get how he got there, we first have to look at the empire his father had already built.
You see, the whole story of Manhattan luxury is actually built on a legacy of outer borough grit. To understand the son's ambition, we have to start with the father, Fred Trump, and the huge utilitarian real estate machine he created long before Trump was a global brand. Now, Fred Trump wasn't a builder of glamorous penthouses. He was a master of mass construction for the middle class. In fact, he was so good at it that newspapers in the 1930s actually called him the Henry Ford of real estate for his ability to churn out affordable housing on a massive scale, mostly in Brooklyn and Queens. The sheer scale of what he did is kind of staggering. Over his career, Fred Trump built about 27,000 homes and apartments. I mean, just think about that for a second. That's enough housing for a small city. He wasn't just putting up buildings, he was literally creating entire neighborhoods, leaving this huge mark on the landscape of post-war New York. So, how'd he do it? Well, his rise was deeply, deeply intertwined with the US government. As you can see from this timeline, federal loans were the fuel for his expansion, from the FHA in the 30s to Navy housing during World War II. But, this close relationship also brought a lot of scrutiny. He was investigated by the Senate in '54 and a New York State Committee in '66 for allegedly profiting a little too much from these public programs. But the investigations weren't just about the finances. By the 1960s, as the civil rights movement was gaining real momentum, Fred Trump's organization came under fire for a totally different reason. Who was being denied a place to live in his thousands of apartments? This quote right here, it comes from a former rental agent. Here's the story. In 1963, a black nurse named Maxine Brown turned in what was described as a beautiful application for an apartment in Queens. When the agent, Stanley Leibowitz, asked Fred Trump what to do with it, that was the alleged instruction. Brown's application would end up becoming a key piece of evidence in a much, much bigger story. And apparently there was a system for this. A former Trump superintendent later testified that employees were instructed to mark applications from black apartment seekers with a big letter C for colored on a separate piece of paper attached to the application. This alleged practice led to some pretty damning statistics. For example, investigators found only 7 black families living in a 3,700-unit Trump complex. This evidence became the basis for a major federal lawsuit. In 1973, the Justice Department sued Trump management, naming both Fred and the company's then 27-year-old president, Donald Trump. They ended up settling with a consent decree, basically promising to change without admitting guilt. But just 3 years later, the government accused them of violating that very agreement. Now, what's really fascinating is that even as this whole legal battle was unfolding, Donald Trump was already engineering a huge pivot for the family name. He was looking beyond his father's world of middle-class housing in Brooklyn and Queens and setting his sights on the glamour and high-stakes real estate of Manhattan. I mean, the strategic shift was just profound. Fred's business was built on volume. Donald's was going to be built on veneer. It was a very conscious rebranding of the Trump name, moving it away from these outer borough controversies and associating it with Fifth Avenue luxury, celebrities, and just staggering price tags. And if you want a perfect symbol of this shift in strategy, look no further than the fate of Steeplechase Park. This was a legendary, almost magical place in Coney Island. Fred Trump bought it, not to save it, but to tear it down and replace it with what he called Miami Beach housing. The only problem was the land was zoned for amusements, not apartments. So to force the city's hand, he did something pretty extraordinary. He sent out these engraved invitations for a demolition party. Guests, including models in bikinis, were encouraged to literally throw bricks through the famous stained glass front of the park. It was a very public, very aggressive act of destruction, basically designed to show the city he wouldn't be stopped.
This aggressive approach carried right over into Manhattan. To land his first huge project, transforming the old Commodore Hotel, Donald relied heavily on his father's resources. And Fred didn't just provide capital, he personally guaranteed massive loans, and maybe more importantly, he gave his son access to the city officials he'd known for decades. The father's empire, built in the boroughs, became the son's launchpad into Manhattan. And of course, this Manhattan success story became the foundation for a really powerful public narrative. It was the myth of the self-made man, who, as he often claimed, built this incredible empire with just a small loan of $1 million from his father. The financial reality, however, looks quite a bit different. A huge investigation by the New York Times found that Donald Trump received what would be, in today's money, at least $413 million from his father's empire. And this wealth wasn't just a single loan, it was transferred through a complex series of gifts and other financial arrangements over his lifetime. And yet, this financial history isn't widely known. This chart, from a study on voter perceptions, shows that even as recently as 2018, about half of Americans surveyed just didn't know that he was born into great wealth. So there's this really significant gap between the documented financial history and public perception. So why does that gap matter? Well, that same academic research found that this misperception has a real, measurable political effect. Voters who believe he was not born wealthy are more likely to see him as empathetic, someone who can understand their struggles, and as a more skilled, self-made businessman. And those perceptions, in turn, increase support. All of this history leaves us with a final question. The towers of Manhattan cast very long shadows. And as we've seen, those shadows can obscure the foundations, the money, the politics, and the controversies that lie beneath. They shape not just a skyline, but the very story a city tells about itself.